As a disabled person, there's been countless examples I could give of the barriers and obstacles that I've had to face, which are not issues that only I've faced, but my peers across the country would give you similar examples. The typical example could be of how professionals have tried to pigeonhole me into doing, making choices that would suit them rather than me. And I will give you an example. In 1993, I had an assessment by social workers to be placed in a day service as a disabled person, because that's where they felt I belonged. And I had no idea what a day service was. And so I went along. And within 2 hours, well, not even 2 hours, I'd say about an hour, I walked out. And I did something strange. For the life of me, I can't remember why I said this, but I said, I'll be back. And I had a bit of a go at the manager on the way out as well, say, is this what you think I'm capable of, that you want me to sit here basket weaving and making bird tables? To cut a long story short, 20 years later, I signed a contract with the local authority to take over that day centre and become the CEO. And that same manager was there, who had also made that assessment originally, and he didn't recognise me, which showed that he had no idea I was just a disabled person who was a number for him, without thinking about any aspirations and dreams that I may have had about what I want to do in life. And that's, as I say, is the way some professionals will quite happily pigeonhole disabled people into something that it just quickly moves them along onto the next disabled person to assess. And so that's been quite a challenge for, as I say, not just me, but many disabled people will say something similar. Other examples are, not necessarily work related, but I was one of the first disabled Bhangra singers in the UK. I'm going back to the late 80s, mid to late 1980s. And many people at that time felt uncomfortable with seeing me as a disabled person on stage. And one even went as far as saying, you shouldn't be doing that. It's not good for your health. And I thought, well, how do you know that? And that's, again, an example of how society wants to pigeonhole you and not let you live. I just wanted to be a silly pop star. It was nothing to do with whether I succeeded or not. It was just as a teenager, it was just something, an expression I was trying to make. But again, a few years later, I signed record deals. My album and some of my tracks are still played by the BBC. And again, it shows you how beliefs and pigeonholing again by people can make disabled people feel that they have no part to play in any mainstream society, social function. So that kind of, it gives you the sometimes drive as a disabled person to say, well, I'll show you. And you go through life in overdrive, working flat out at 150% when you don't need to. And many disabled people have early burnout because they've had to work so hard, constantly prove. And that's something I think is not something that's going to disappear overnight. We need a complete reset on the way society views disabled people. And I'm not talking about just physically impaired people. I'm talking about people from all impairment groups, whether it's a learning difficulty, autism, sight impairment or whatever. It's people need to be integrated more. And one thing I always say is that disability is going to get you at some stage, whether you're disabled or not. And I say this to the 85% of the population which hasn't stated that it has a disability or a long-term illness. It's going to get you. And it's too late to start thinking about how you're treating disabled people when it's affected you personally. It's going to get you, whether it's directly or indirectly, could be through directly to you or through a loved one. And that's when you suddenly hit home. It suddenly hits home that about your prejudices and your ignorance that you had most of your life. And I'll say that's too late. If you can start making changes now, it will save. It's not just about saving money for the governments, because if society as a whole starts to think differently, we'll automatically make those reasonable adjustments that everybody expects, legislation expects us to make. It's about having a mindset change. You know, I've always said you can spend hundreds of thousands of pounds of making a building accessible, but you've wasted every single penny if the first person that you see when you walk through the door is ignorant towards your impairment. And so it's about educating society, and that's something I think needs to happen right at school age. And it's good to see that we've got an integrated education system, a better integrated system than I had. When I went to school as a disabled child, I was the only disabled child in the whole school. But interestingly, those children that grew up with me, when I see them years later, they actually don't remember my disability. It's only me now, shouting loud and proud that I'm a disabled person, that they actually say, were you disabled at school? It's because they grew up with me. They didn't see me. To them, I was just another kid. And that's what's going to change the world. We need more of that. And we've not got enough of that. Even when we've got integrated schools, sometimes children are singled out and put to one side. That's not integrating children. That's not creating a mixed environment of ability. It's still saying that you're different. These kids are different over here. So I think there's work to be done there. I think one of the issues that hits me now, I'm in my mid-50s now. One of the things that really hits me, that when I was growing up as a child, or even as a teenager, or even as a young adult, I didn't have any role models. There wasn't any disabled people that I could see in the media who could say that, well, I want to be like him or her. Whatever they're doing, I want to do that. So I didn't see any disabled people in high-profile positions that I could say I want to be like them. About 4 years ago, I published a book based on my life story, which I really did it just for my grandkids. And I thought, well, one day they'll read about what Granddad was up to. And when it was published, it became an overnight success. And the vast majority of people who've read it were many disabled people, or those where there was disability in the family. And the constant thing that comes back to me now, whether it's in an email or a social media inbox or whatever, is people saying to me, we want to be like you. And that's very powerful. It's great for my ego, but equally it's showing that they've got somebody that they can measure themselves against that. And, you know, I have lots of parents of newly diagnosed disabled children who say, when we look at people like you, it gives us hope that not all is lost. And that's something that needs to happen now. There needs to be more disabled people able to shout loud and proud about what they're doing. And I always say to disabled people, for us to change society, we have to own that impairment. That impairment mustn't define us, we must define the impairment. For example, I have cerebral palsy, and I always say I have cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy does not have me. And the only way I can keep on top of what's going on is for me to say, cerebral palsy is a condition that I have, but what I'm doing is actually defining a new version of cerebral palsy. It's defining what can be achieved, rather than what cannot be done. So, you know, societies and policymakers need to really have a good think about how they make use of people who are in prominent positions to be able to go around, whether it's going around schools or whether it's going around the offices, and having a real say in what's needed to change mindsets. Whenever there's budget cuts by governments, one of the first things that happen is businesses get rid of the training budget because they see that as a luxury. To train their staff is a luxury. And I understand that. So in the last 10 or so years, there's been a whole section of the workforce that has had no disability or general equality training. And that's a shame, because they won't understand how to mix and integrate with their fellow disabled employees. And employers won't really know how to interact and support disabled employees either. So, they need to take advantage of people in those positions like myself, and there's loads of people around the country like me who are doing this now, are going around talking about how to work. There's no template of how to employ a disabled person or how to have a good relationship with a disabled colleague. There's no template. It's about common sense most of the time. And sometimes employment workforces just need to have an open dialogue, and people like me can just be the catalyst in that process, and that needs to happen. And it's not, sometimes, as I say, employers seem to think of it as a luxury, but what you don't realize is by opening your service, your product and your workforce up to disabled people, you're just probably going to improve your sales by an extra 15%, because the purple pound, as it's known, is worth billions. And there's an economical reason as well to do it. If you really want to run a business, if you really want to have a productive workforce, you look at the facts and figures. Disabled people are more likely to want to spend their money where they see people like them. And it's not just about disabled people. I say every workforce needs to reflect the community it wishes to serve, not is serving, but it wishes to serve. And that's sometimes overlooked in any business plan.